ULI has over 45,000 members in 80 countries in the Americas, Europe, and Asia Pacific, across every profession related to real estate and the built environment, from investment to design and development and everything in between. We are united with one shared purpose.
What drives us is the opportunity to make a difference, to make the world a better place through what we add to the built environment. Because what we build and how we build it fundamentally determines how people live, how they work and play, their access to community, nature, and activities. The impact of our work is transformative.
We make that difference through connection with other members, with our communities. ULI brings people together, which creates the space to put ideas together.
We share our knowledge and experience to cultivate bigger, broader thinking. We produce best-in-class research, education, and content on urgent global issues, all to inspire continual innovation of best practices for equitable and sustainable land use.
We are leaders in the built world because we apply these best practices to solve real challenges facing communities worldwide. Solutions that add to our global knowledge base. It is an ongoing cycle adaptation advancement driven by our desire to make the built world better.
Our mission statement expresses why ULI exists. It's our North Star, our vision. It's what directs us to do what is right, to set an uncompromising example, to build a better tomorrow.
ULI is its members, and together we fulfill our mission to shape the future of the built environment for transformative impact in communities worldwide.
Well, I'm glad that we're going to have this opportunity to talk about affordable housing, and I hope that all of you provide us with very meaningful comments. So let me start off with one particular question. So let's say you're an affordable housing developer and you want to, build a project in some community. What makes you decide to enter a certain community, and what kinds of things are you looking for before you decide to broach that community with a particular project?
Well, I would say first and foremost, we're looking for market demand. We're looking for demonstrated demand. So we're not going to go into a community in which there's no need for affordable housing. Those communities are few and far between. But that's criteria number one.
Yeah, we like to meet with the municipality. We like to drive the market, things like that, to just get a sense of, Erica talks about demand, but what does that demand look like? What are the housing typologies that are present in the market that are in strong demand? Is that something we could replicate or enhance and build upon? So those are kind of the initial criteria that we look at.
So do you approach the staff? Do you approach the political body when you first decide that you want to enter a particular community? Can you describe for me that process?
Yeah, I would say that it's different in every case. I can say, for example, Magda is an architect who has a ton of relationships, and we can work with an architect to, who can introduce us to an agency or folks in a locality. There have been times where we've gone to the head of economic development and sat down and said, this is what we want to do. Where in your community is this needed? Where should we focus our efforts? So it really depends on sort of the vision that's coming together and the municipality and sort of the cast of characters that we identify as stakeholders, and then kind of backing into which stakeholders do we need to approach first and bring on board, and then bring along with us as we approach more stakeholders.
Do you find that you need market analysis information from the jurisdiction, or what kinds of demographic material do you look at? If you were a jurisdiction and you wanted to approach your firm, how would I attract you to come into our community?
A lot of jurisdictions have some sort of housing analysis that they've already done. We can also look to comprehensive plans, which will speak to the existing housing typology and where the gaps are. So that can be the foundation for any discussion.
Comprehensive plans lay out need, and you go there and you can say, well, this aligns with the need that's been identified, and you can have political influence say that's not what we want, so it doesn't matter. And so that's hard.
So you spent some time earlier talking about the importance of design.
Yep.
And so one of the things that always comes up with respect to affordable housing is the perception in a community that somehow affordable housing is going to be less desirable and therefore perhaps have a poorer design to it. Can you speak to that?
Definitely. I think that's entirely not true. Many of the funding agencies set minimum standards that require quality materials, that require accessibility, that require a certain amount of outdoor spaces. So in many cases, affordable housing has a higher bar than just kind of market rate housing.
And how can you convince folks? Because it's hard for me to say this, but I think a lot of folks have a preconception when they hear the term affordable housing, that they think of housing from what used to be the Soviet Union in 1960, as a matter of fact. But it's really not the case. But that's the image that they have in their head. So what can you do to dispel that image? Do you come to a community and show them, pictures of things? How do you communicate that? Because words sometimes don't necessarily get it done.
We show them pictures of things, and sometimes we work with clients to take people on tours. And they will go into a facility and they'll be like, well, this doesn't look like affordable housing from the outside or the inside. And we find that's actually more effective than photographs because they also get to meet the residents, because that's a scary thing too, right? People think, oh, well, they're other, but that's not actually the case.
But when you're from outside the community trying to get work someplace,
yeah,
how do you really do that? How do you get the community, both the politicians and the citizens, to trust you? Because you don't necessarily know who that community is. How does that work?
We've been sort of the outside developer coming into communities, and a lot of that trust building is just, I hate to say this, but like who we are. We're transparent. We go in there, we're clear about our vision, how we're going to achieve it, what we're trying to do. We are thoughtful about who the stakeholders are that we want to bring onto sort of our bench or the team. And it's not always successful, but that's really, you have to understand who you're dealing with, what the challenges are, where they're coming from, and then kind of approach it starting there. I think when you're from far away, you really have to prove yourself. When you don't say, oh, I have 27 developments, down the street, you can go look at any one of them. It is a little bit tougher.
And I would, build off of that, I think we gain a ton of trust as soon as we reach out. We're reaching out early in the process, which is a lot more than other developers might do. So we're engaging early and often, and that's a method for trust building.
So Dana, I know we'll hear from you in a moment about the role that energy policy and energy incentives can offer to make housing a little bit more affordable. But first I'd like to ask the two of you a question. What kinds of incentives can a municipality offer that would induce you to come into their community?
Any kind of real estate tax relief is much needed and can support our project in very meaningful ways. In some cases, it can allow us to do some deeper targeting. So that means to target lower income households, even lower income households, which is always the mission of ours. And we recognize that in a lot of communities, they don't have formal structures in place for such tax relief, and we're very happy to talk to municipalities about different mechanisms for providing that relief. There's a plethora of options, and just sort of figuring out what might work for them.
Do you find that programs that have worked in other jurisdictions can be applicable to other jurisdictions? In other words, best practices? How does that work for the business that you're in?
So for example, we're working with a jurisdiction right now that doesn't have a pilot program or a rebate program. And so we're saying, here, can we talk to you about a tool that might be relatively simple for you to implement that will support affordable housing development for us and for other developers, and potentially promote and augment, almost your community as a place to go. And so we have those conversations, and then we can sort of show examples, what they do in Chesterfield County, for example, or just, a pilot, which is very straightforward, a payment in lieu of taxes. And part of it is telling the story of why these offsets or incentives are important. It's not, it's wonderful for the deal because it allows us to do deeper targeting. Another thing that we ask for, and some municipalities are flexible with, is fee waivers. So you're paying for a site plan review, you're paying for, all of your land development permits, your building permits. There's a lot of fees that go into just the entitlement stage that if a jurisdiction was willing to waive, it helps. It really does. And I mean, any bit helps. And I know Dana's going to talk about energy dollars, but I think there's such an opportunity to link what, sort of those incentives at the local level and the municipal level with energy and with housing. And so there's this opportunity for like a perfect marriage. But we're all still hashing that out.
So to that point, the National Housing Trust is one of the leaders in energy policy. Can you speak for a moment, please, on how you could actually use policy to affect more affordable housing, and how can these developers use your knowledge and your organization to help them produce affordable housing?
Absolutely. So I think it's really important. I mean, we were talking about kind of what do you do right at the very beginning, and I think that evaluating energy efficiency and renewable energy opportunities while the project is in the design phase and while financing is still on the table is critical, because it is just another tool to invest in affordable housing to ensure that longevity and lower operating costs and more affordable rents. And so with the tools that are coming online in Virginia, it's really important to talk to these agencies, DHCD, the Housing Finance Agency, and directly to utilities to figure out what is available and what can work for your project.
I think that's so interesting, but what we struggle with as developers, and we were talking about this earlier, is we don't all speak the same language. We are so well versed in affordable housing and AMIs and extremely low income and what all that means. And then you put us in a room about energy and we're like, yeah, we want solar. Okay. And so it's like connecting those dots seems like a challenge. How are you guys doing that? Sorry.
No, it's okay. And where does that dot fit in terms of design? Like, where would you be in that particular process?
So ideally in the beginning, I agree completely with Dana that if you start thinking about all those opportunities at the beginning of the design process, it's integrated and it's not additive. So it's kind of part of the design. But often people don't know what's out there, right? So I do in the jurisdiction I work in, but I don't nationwide, and that's why your organization is so helpful, because you can kind of identify all of those opportunities.
Now, the two of you spent some time in your session earlier talking about LIHTC and tax credits. Can you spend a little time talking about how you might combine different types of tax benefits to make a deal affordable? Historic tax credits, LIHTC tax credits, and perhaps you actually can illustrate in a particular project how you actually were able to use them?
Sure. So we have an example in upstate New York, in Buffalo, a project that we're really proud of that KCG developed called AP Lofts. And that's a project that it's an adaptive reuse of a historic warehouse, A&P warehouse. And we leverage historic tax credits, low-income housing tax credits, brownfield tax credits. Those are state credits that are available in New York for brownfields, which are really, really environmentally challenged sites that need a lot of extra remediation.
They're underutilized industrial sites.
Yes, thank you. And I do think we did layer in some state energy benefit, but it was a small amount. And so that was brain damage. That was impossible. It was hard, but it was the way we got it done, and it's a beautiful, beautiful project.
Do you think localities really understand how difficult it is to package an affordable housing deal?
No.
Sometimes developers don't until you get into the deal. But no.
So as a person who works for a local government at the moment, we talk about education and the importance of education, but education also only goes so far. So how do you educate folks to actually feel comfortable with the idea of affordable housing? What kinds of strategies
you show
can
them
you use?
Images of Magda's project. You say, look at what we're building. Look at it's beautiful. I know I keep saying this, but it's really about building trust in the beginning. Because if you go into a group of people or a new community and you're like, here's what we're going to do, people are reticent to accept that. And so it seems like you have to sort of build trust and you have to build a coalition around an idea. And that's how we're successful, because we get people excited about the idea, and then how do we all crack the nut to figure it out?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in terms of specific things that we're doing, besides that engagement, within that engagement, we're putting a face to the project. And so oftentimes we'll go in and say, these are the types of people that are going to be living in this community. It is teachers, it is firefighters, it is policemen, and that sort of humanizes the project and makes it more compelling.
And like what Matt just said, when people meet the residents, and you can connect because you look at a resident like, oh, now this is personal.
Yeah.
It's not affordable housing for other people who need it. Like, look at these people who live here. It's my mother-in-law. It's, it's people we know.
So what size project do you typically look for? And Magda, one of the things we talked about earlier is, does it always have to be multi-family housing of 4 to 6 stories or something? Can it be townhomes? Can it be other type of housing? And what does the cost of land, how does that factor into how this all works out? And any of you can answer that particular question.
I think the size of the deal really depends on the site itself, what the site can accommodate, and then our financing mechanisms. So if we're pursuing a 9% credit versus a 4% credit.
And can you explain what those are, please?
Stacy can explain it better than I can.
The 9% credit is the competitive tax credit process that Virginia Housing puts out once a year, and is very prescriptive, and there's a point scoring system. So you have to get the highest amount of points, and so deal size, and sort of you fit your deal into a box, and often you are you're encouraged to sort of ask for less resources and find more ways to leverage, and so deals can typically be a little bit smaller. Now you have people pairing the 9 with the 4, and I'll talk about the 4% credit, which is by right and available when you leverage tax-exempt bond financing. And developers love the 4% credit because it's not competitive, and competing for a 9% deal costs a lot of money, takes a lot of time and effort, and then you might not get it.
I think one time you told me it's a race to the bottom.
It feels like that because you are trying to keep it within certain cost limits, but you're trying, and you have to size it in a way. I mean, you're really designing a deal around a point system, around a scoring system, versus what is going to be supported by the site, what does the market need, and it's not all bad.
And I think in terms of the architecture, the building type, it can be a whole variety of building types. It's not necessarily 4 or 5 story. And what we're seeing in some of the older suburbs where there's housing stock that's deteriorating is seeing new townhouse development. So single family rental homes. We're seeing more garden apartments, so that's a 3-story walk up with 4 units on each floor. Those are a little less expensive to build, and when you do infill as opposed to doing greenfields, in other words, going and building in the country where there's not enough sewer lines, there's not enough roads, so the fees to add that extra infrastructure are high. The kind of infill projects work pretty well, but land cost definitely does impact it. You're not going to do townhouses in Manhattan.
So how much land do you need to get a combination of different types of uses? I mean, we're talking 10 acres, 5 acres, 20 acres. What do you look for?
We typically, if we're looking, we look for infill opportunities because that's very community centric. We like that. And then if we're looking for opportunities for new construction, we can typically get, depending on the municipality, like 10 to 20 units an acre. And so depending on the size of the deal, we were talking about tax-exempt bond deals, those work better, those are financially feasible when you have a greater number of units. So you're looking for more density versus a 9% where you maybe don't need that density because the equity, the capital stack is different. I think we start with markets we want to be in, and then we, look at where is the need, and then we kind of drill down into the opportunities that way. So it really, in our portfolio with Magda, in fact, we're doing an adaptive reuse project of a small office building, an office complex, and we're converting that into housing.
So do you think, given the current state of affairs of the office market sort of coming out of the pandemic, are you looking at office buildings and retrofitting as office buildings being a next market?
And lots of developers are. We all are. It's sexy, And also hotels. That's another one. You guys will start to see, if you haven't already, a lot of developers are looking at how can we take some of these hotels that are failing due to the change in the economy and convert them into what we call SRO, or one-bedroom units, or supportive housing, or reimagine those buildings as something else.
So I want to get back to an energy policy question, especially in Virginia. Are you talking to housing in Virginia, and how does the National Housing Trust actually work with other housing finance agencies, not just in Virginia but across the United States?
Sure. So I think it is on kind of that connecting the dots piece. So in Virginia, National Housing Trust participates in the Multifamily Energy Efficiency Coalition. It's a coalition of housing and energy policy organizations and providers of energy efficiency services that are working together at the General Assembly to push policies that work for low-income residents and affordable housing developers. And we kind of stay on top of what is happening and what is available. And so I do want to pick up on something you guys were talking about earlier, which is kind of how do you educate policymakers and decision makers about this. And I think there's also the need to kind of break down the silos that everyone's working within at the state policy level. There are all of these new energy resources that are available, but the energy policymakers aren't talking to the affordable housing financiers to understand kind of how to get that money on the street in an effective way.
So how do we do this? I'm sorry. How do we do that? How do you have those conversations, and who should be the convener of those conversations?
I think MFEEC is a great convener of that kind of on an advocacy level. I think that we have just learned a ton from each other and really kind of getting on the same page, even language-wise. When you talk about cost effectiveness to a utility, it means something completely different when you're talking about cost effectiveness to a multifamily affordable housing developer. And so even getting kind of a shared language and a shared understanding of things like financing timelines and construction timelines. If utilities are working on a year timeline, they're going to want to spend money fast. That doesn't work when you're trying to incorporate something into a LIHTC deal, which you might get the allocation in 1 year, not start construction till the next year, and not finish until 2 years from then. So it's really about kind of understanding the shared interests and the constraints that each are working under.
Dana, I think what you said about silos, it really resonated with me, because I think it's something we've been sort of talking about all day, which is we all know what we know, and we're trying to appeal to a broader community. We're trying to get more people to understand the importance of what we're doing and help make that happen. And at the policy level, policymakers are in their silos. We talked about PACE financing, for example, but it doesn't necessarily marry up with the affordable housing, the LIHTC program. And so just trying to really break down those barriers and creating more of a common language around resilient housing. But we could call it resilient housing, and that includes affordable, and that includes, it's talking about design, it's talking about energy efficiency. And so policies that just sort of lump all of that together, so we don't have to, it doesn't take 12 sources and to get a deal closed. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, to break those silos down.
We need like a rotational program where everybody in the industry gets to work in development for 6 months, then in policy for 6 months, then in architecture for 6 months, and because it does feel that way, that we're operating in silos and sort of our narrow spaces.
And I think that one of the things that has been really helpful in the spheres that I work in is really the anatomy of these deals and understanding how other developers closed and incorporated utility incentives and other energy efficiency funding and some of these kind of newer elements, and those do exist. And so I think more education with actual case studies of projects that are in the ground, where you open up the books and look at how it was done, is going to be the way that we kind of really spread this knowledge.
I always like to say that developers don't come out in the light of day to sort of make their case. And I think it's very difficult for a developer to be an advocate and a developer at the same time. Do you feel conflicted, in your passion here, and yet your end goal of wanting to produce something that is an affordable product?
I don't feel conflicted. I've never really thought about it in that way. I don't know about you, Stacy.
No, I mean, I can be self-loathing, and I can walk into a room and be like, I know I'm a developer, so what does that make you think? Yeah, like, I understand, you know, you can have a perception of developers, and we're a for-profit company too, but we're mission-driven. And at the end of the day, I said this in our session, I mean, what we're building is so important, it's so needed, it's so beautiful. There are so many great people on the team making it happen, and I'm just very proud of that, and I'm proud to be building something that we need.
But what I was trying to say was, sometimes it might appear to the community that you're self-serving.
Right.
Yet you're also an advocate, and so that's sometimes a conflict for you.
Well,
so that's really what I was trying to get at.
I do try to advocate for other developers, other development deals. There's kind of like a code, you know, not a code. I say that, but I don't actually know if there's a code. I just think if you see a peer trying to get something done and you can be supportive of that, then you should be supportive of that. And I think then developers can help each other. And
that's one of the great things about ULI, is that you meet within the same organization, developers, contractors, architects, policy people, and having those contacts makes a big difference.
Now, I firmly believe, as we talked about it earlier, in design. But sometimes you come up against jurisdictions who have attorneys who don't think you can codify design in a code or something like that. Can you speak to how local jurisdictions can ensure that they're going to get really good design, especially when it comes to affordable housing, or what you need from a jurisdiction?
I think having good teams makes a big difference. So people who are qualified, people that they can see work that has been done before, you know, kind of like a pre-qualified list of bidders, both contractors and designers. That's one. A qualification-based design is basically what that's called. I think that it is hard to codify good design, but you can have minimum standards that are really important to help promote good practices. And zoning makes a big difference.
And that's a good point.
Yeah.
If someone was going to look at a traditional zoning code, it's all words. Some of them now are starting to have pictures. What could a local government do, whether or not it's a city or a county or a town, to make their zoning code so much more palatable? So not only helps you as practitioners, but it also helps the community understand what it is that they're going to get at the end, because that's sometimes what I think is a barrier here.
well, I suspect you could do an entire MasterClass series on zoning.
Yes.
Because zoning can be used as a tool for evil, and zoning can be used as a tool for good. And I think inclusionary zoning is something I'm very supportive of. I walk the walk in my own community, because I think more often than not, it's a tool used for evil, or a tool used to reinforce existing boundaries and borders and separations that we have. I have actually a question for you, Magda, and I'm not trying to take us away from zoning, but how is design different when you're working on a multifamily market rate, pure market rate versus live tech? Because I always wondered, I can't imagine that the conversations and, you know, we're talking about quality of life in these units, and are they that different, or?
They are not very different, actually, interestingly enough. I think there are often more stringent energy standards for light-tech affordable projects, especially 9% deals, because you're getting points for going up to the passive level, passive house level. But in terms of amenities, design of the apartment, size of the apartments, it's not different at all. It's the same space. The quality is the same.
And I also think that there is a role that we can play as private citizens too. And I do this a lot when I'm out with my friends in DC and they make a comment about a neighborhood or a building that's going up, and I tell them that's affordable housing. Or when I'm driving by, I'm like, that's affordable housing. Or my friends who live in certain neighborhoods where I know NHT has a property, I'm like, hey, we own that building, we operate that property. And I think it does help to destigmatize affordable housing and understand that it's a very important part of the fabric of a neighborhood.
And I think one of the things that stigmatizes affordable housing is this whole notion of, you know, that renters are somehow have less class, so to speak, than homeowners.
Yeah.
And I don't know necessarily how to dispel that, and it's something that's very
Dang
dear to me,
it.
quite frankly, having grown up a renter.
Yeah.
You know, and it's so hard. You know, in many jurisdictions, a single-family house is beyond the means of most folks who actually work in that particular community. As a matter of fact, you've got prices now averaging $350,000, which requires $50,000 worth of down payment, $2,000 a month worth of mortgage, plus all the other costs that come with owning a home. So how does that play in, and how can we have that conversation so that folks understand that it's not necessarily a separate class of individuals that comprise renters?
Well, so you started with an interesting point that people view renters as like lesser than homeowners. And I think where that comes from, what I've learned in my conversations is it's that they don't have there's no pride of home or pride of ownership or pride of, but renters have things, and then you start talking about, it's great to have these conversations with someone who has a child just coming out of college and getting their first job in the workforce, because they're, the cost of living, and I'm like, well, yeah, well, have you looked at, housing tax credit finance properties? Because a lot of these, young up-and-comers are eligible. Like in the DC region, the area median income in DC is $129,000.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. That is the area median for a four-person household.
But still.
Yeah. So you start out house poor if you want to live in the cool parts of town or you want to live near your job. I mean, it is very hard. So you have to start with getting people to relate to who the renter is, or it's Bubby, Bubby's gonna live there. So I feel like there's ways you personalize it for people. But it's always getting back to, it's an issue that is important to all of us, not other people. It's getting people to understand what it means to them.
I also think that lots of folks tend to think that if it's a rental building, that somehow it's not going to be managed appropriately. Now, you have a lot of experience in this arena. How do you deal with the property management issue, and how do you dispel the notion that somehow if I allow this building to be built, that it's going to deteriorate in 10 years, or more importantly, that the materials used in that building are somehow of a lesser quality?
Well, we're held to higher design standards and energy efficient standards.
You're welcome.
We talked about this in our earlier in our conversation, that the QAP, the Qualified Allocation Plan that the states put out, are prescriptive about the types of energy efficiency they want us to achieve. They're prescriptive about the quality of the buildings, and then our investors, who are going to be looking over our shoulder, the IRS, everyone's going to be checking up on us at least twice a year. We have compliance requirements. So all of the operating and the quality and all of that is different in a LIHTC financed project, because we're here for 40 plus years.
I would also add, at least in Virginia, I mean, there are expectations from Virginia Housing as to how much money we're allocating in operating expenses per unit. So we're using Virginia Housing as a lender on one of our deals right now, and they're looking to see that we are allocating $6,000 per unit per year for our operating expenses. So, and that's going to escalate from there.
And how about the design factor that I mentioned before, the fact that somehow folks have a perception that the materials are going to be different? How can we address that better at a local level?
I think driving around and pointing out to people which buildings they are, right? So that people identify it. I mean, one of the tremendous failures of affordable housing in America was that in the 70s, there was less and less funding for maintenance, and budgets were being cut. And so those buildings were not maintained. We have learned from that, and that's not happening anymore. So I think telling that story is also helpful, saying there were choices made not to pay for standard maintenance for public subsidized buildings, and that's why they fell apart.
Well, and that's
no longer allowed.
And that's what led to the LIHTC program being created, because Reagan and his tax advisors were like, we've got to get the government out of housing. We're not doing a good job. Unfortunately, that is the image that we are every day fighting against. The image that Magda just talked about. That's what we're constantly up against, and it's unfortunate, but that's part of our job.
And that is where there may be an opportunity in these climate conversations, because we're talking about resilience, and resilience is design, location, and building materials. And so the buildings that we're going to be building are going to be in place and standing in 2050 and 2060, and we better make sure that they can withstand flooding due to coastal sea level rise and kind of these extreme heat and cold events that we're anticipating.
And cicadas every 17 years.
And cicadas.
Rude X.
I would also say in terms of like maintaining LIHTC properties, I think a lot of people assume that our residents are forced into live there, like being told, okay, if you want to live in affordable housing, you need to live in this unit. No, like we're subject to market forces as well. And so we have to ensure that our units are equally marketable and, to our consumers.
I'm curious, have you ever taken a look at at least the first round of tenants in a new building? Do you think most of the folks who move into your building are actually living around there? Because one of the things that sometimes I think is when you build a new building, folks move there are already in your neighborhood and they're moving to the shiny new object, so to speak. Have you ever done an analysis of where your initial residents come from?
We haven't specifically. We do in our upfront market research. We look at capture. So where do we think we're going to be capturing residents from? And there's sort of a sphere you draw around that. You'll get a majority maybe within this radius, and then some will come from far away. I would say, in my experience, anecdotally, in senior properties, people will come from farther away to be closer to their families. That's sort of a big move. It's a downsizing move, and we don't have a lot of turnover in these properties either. That's the other thing. Like we have wait lists upon wait lists. And as a consumer of affordable housing now, on behalf of a family member trying to sort of find, affordable housing in our community where I live, I'm laughing at the irony because I'm like, it takes 3 years to get a project built, and you have to convince so many people that you need it, and bam, it's built, and now you got to get on a wait list, and maybe you'll be lucky if you get your loved one in there or not. I mean, that's crazy to me. There's so much demand, and
what is it? What is the demand for studios? 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms? I guess maybe it depends on the marketplace. Can you talk about how you come to the decision about what types of units you're going to have in a particular project?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we're going to start with the tenancy. So is it a senior property versus a family property? In senior properties, we're more skewed towards 1s and 2s. And in family properties, we're looking more up to 3 bedrooms. And we also see a lot of demand for, 4 bedrooms as well.
And Magda said earlier, like single family, townhome, and we will build to the demand. So we will, we have townhouses on one of our Georgia projects because we recognize that is sort of a missing typology in that market, and it will go well. People hate, we were talking about one project where there were a bunch of 3-bedroom units. Like 3-bedroom units are in high demand, and sometimes because families want to have an office, not because they're filling, so you have to really think about the market and take out this sort of affordable piece because it's for everyone. We're building this for, it's a universal issue. And so what kinds of housing do people want? And, you have to have that spectrum and offer that variety.
I think one of the arguments that I've heard across the country, as a matter of fact, that talks about affordable housing and family units, larger units, is the impact that the units are going to have on the school system, and then using the fact that impact, is going to be very negative. Can you talk? Do you have experience in that? Can you speak to that anywhere across the country?
I mean, every municipality we're in, that issue is raised. If a family deal, oftentimes senior deals are much more palatable.
Safer?
Yeah. I mean, so I had it in my hometown, not a project of mine, but a different multifamily, not even a LIHTC development is going up in my town. It's a beautiful project, it's mixed use, and it's going to be huge for the community. And all of my neighbors and peers and friends were very worried about the impact to schools. And you really just kind of have to take a step back and be like, yes, you can come up with a number that a 3-bedroom apartment is going to yield 1.5 kids, but you also just have to take a step back and look. We have very, very wealthy single-family homes in our community, and those are where the students are moving, and families are buying homes, moving in, sending theirs. So the impact of schools from single-family homes is much greater in my community than from apartments, but there is not a fear there is an understanding or some sort of mental division of the kids that are going to live in apartments versus the kids in these single family homes, and it's outrageous. So you have to, it's science and art, and if you have a school district that is open and has data and is willing to work with you, 9 times out of 10, they're going to say the impact of one multifamily community, even if it's 400 units on a school district, will be negligible. What will it do? It will add to the tax base. It will mean that there are more people living in the community spending money. It will mean that you have more children from diverse backgrounds living and playing together and going to school together. The benefit, the long-term benefit of that is remarkable and will impact the schools, and it will allow the school district to grow and be richer. One apartment complex or multifamily development is not going to upend a school system, and that's a troubling trope that we are constantly unwinding.
So I want to thank the 4 of you, by the way, for participating in this event, because I think this is groundbreaking stuff, to be honest with you. What can ULI do to help further the conversation with respect to affordable housing? What do you need from this organization, specifically ULI Virginia? Anybody?
Convening conversations like this. I mean, I've learned just today in talking to Dana and even Magda, we work with you regularly, just hearing a different perspective in this environment is incredible.
Anything else from any of you?
Well, I think convening educational series on some of these new tools would be a great starting point, but I also think that what we could really do together as a community is build that feedback loop. And so the only way that we're going to kind of spread energy efficiency, renewable energy, and resiliency tools is to make sure that they actually work. And so in order to figure that out, we have to have people that are willing to try them and say, hey, this did work, hey, this didn't work, and then take that to policymakers or decision makers so they can fix it.
I think another interesting thing that ULI can do is this organization is not just focused, ULI is so great because it's not just focused on housing and it's not just focused on sustainability, but you have a broad, constituency. And so taking these issues where we're in our silos on these issues and we're so passionate and sort of raising it so it creates that more exposure and more people understand that, oh, even though I'm a civil engineer doing this, I have an impact and I can plug in and really help kind of move the dial on this. And I think ULI, does an incredible job of convening kind of diverse minds that are all, that all care about development and design.
Well, thank you. And I want to thank Virginia Housing for providing us the financial support to bring to you this MasterClass series.
Affordable housing helps people who live in affordable housing. But Virginia Housing knows it has the power to do so much more, like help create a stable workforce, help boost the local economy, help improve education, help build hope. It's how the people who need their communities and the communities who need them can afford to live together. So who do our loans, grants, and resources help? Well, everyone.